California Local Energy and Climate Colleagues. I'm Angie Hacker, the statewide best practices coordinator with the California Climate and Energy Collaborative. So thank you for tuning in to today's interview with Elena Olmedo. Okay, so welcome, Elena. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So we're just really fortunate to have Elena here with us today because she's going to share how San Jose has designed the city's building electrification plan. It's in progress right now, and it outlines options to electrify the city's buildings equitably. And so, Elena, why don't we just start from the top here? Could you take a moment and just introduce yourself and your role in San Jose's equitable electrification efforts?
Sure. So my name is Elena Olmedo. I am the climate advisor to the city of San Jose, and I am working with San Jose through the American Cities Climate Challenge, which is an initiative that helps cities accelerate some of their most ambitious climate action policies. So on the building electrification plan, I am helping the city lead and develop the plan and conduct some of the stakeholder engagement with the plan.
Why don't we kind of talk more broadly for a second just about where California local governments are with electrification. So at this point, we're here in September 2021, nearly 50 local governments in California have adopted electrification ordinances or building codes to reduce their reliance on gas. That includes the city of San Jose, which was an early groundbreaker. And you guys, you had a REACH code. It was adopted in 2019. I believe it focused on new buildings. In 2020, the city then prohibited natural gas for all new building types with limited temporary exemptions. But now in the last couple of years, you are focused on working on a building electrification plan. So I'm hoping that you can help our listeners who are, like you, working inside of local governments, trying to push these initiatives forward. Learn a little bit more about what is a building electrification plan and why did city decision makers feel that they needed one?
Sure. So a building electrification plan is essentially a framework for how we are going to electrify existing buildings in San Jose. Our plan focuses on how to do it in an equitable way and how to increase building electrification access for people. And I think the reason why we decided to pursue an existing building electrification plan, which focuses on existing buildings, is because, well, we had the REACH code, which was an all-electric friendly REACH code targeting new construction. And then we had the natural gas ban, as you mentioned, but these policies only addressed new construction. And we know that most of our emissions from the built environment are coming from existing buildings. So the existing buildings are kind of the elephant in the room. They need to be addressed in order to reach our climate smart goals and our greenhouse gas reduction targets.
Great, so this plan incorporates everything you're gonna do with both existing and new buildings. Is that right?
So this plan actually only targets existing buildings.
Oh, great, okay. Yeah, there's a couple other sort of groundbreakers here too. I know we had the city of Berkeley also present recently with SEEK, and so learning a lot there. And there's no textbook, right? You guys are kind of creating it as we go, which is why we want to talk to you. Can you tell us what is the intended outcome of the plan?
The intended outcome is to be able to incentivize and encourage the electrification of existing buildings in a way that's equitable. We want to ensure that the benefits of building electrification are made more accessible to everyone.
Right. It sounds like it's setting a foundation of what your priorities are. Is it also setting up, will it set up strategies for how you'll get there and sort of a timeline and all of that?
Yeah, so we have a list of policies and programs that we will be proposing as part of this plan. And as far as the timeline for implementation, those dates won't be set. It'll kind of be dependent on other factors that come into play, like funding and such. But yeah, we will include a series of policies and programs that will show how to get there, how we're planning to electrify existing buildings.
Is there, is there anything else you want to share in terms of the context within the city of San Jose, where are you at in electrification other than the big policy moves we've already made? Are there other movements happening? How much implementation has occurred?
Yeah, we're really getting started on our electrification work, I would say. And when I say electrification, I'm referring to building electrification, because we also have the Department of Transportation that's focusing on EV mobility and electrification opportunities there. So with building electrification, we have launched a few small programs, such as the heat pump water heater program that provided incentives for people to swap out their old water heaters and switch to a heat pump water heater. And we provided incentives to San Jose residents. And then I think that there's also some other small programs, but we're really on, we're really in the beginning of starting our building electrification journey.
Right. So we just finished up the 12th annual SEEK conference, and we learned from a lot of communities that are really beginning to do a better and better job weaving equity into their clean energy and climate work in these really meaningful ways. And while there are some emerging best practices, we I think collectively in SEEK are attempting to establish what are these emerging best practices and share those with each other. So for governments that want to get started on this work, can you tell us more like a step-by-step story of how San Jose began this plan process, including, and I do want to dive into this more, how it's incorporating diverse voices and the priorities that are designed into the plan?
Sure. So it's kind of a long answer. I'll have to say we've been working on this plan, I would say, for about 2.5 years now. We started with collecting data, and we were fortunate to have the support of the Building Electrification Institute. They are a technical expert on building electrification, and they're a really amazing collaborator on the building electrification plan. We've been really fortunate to have their support. So early on, they were able to gather and collect this data for us. Essentially, they created a building inventory so that we could have an idea of what the building stock in San Jose looks like, what the vintage of the buildings, the size of the buildings, who lives in the buildings, is it renters or homeowners? And that allowed us to kind of take a look at what are the opportunities for building electrification in San Jose, as well as pulling data that looked at different social and environmental vulnerability indicators. These social indicators include things like income and race demographics and household size. And then we had environmental indicators that looked at local air quality levels and rates of asthma or asthma-related trips to the ER, heat zones in San Jose. So they looked at all of this data, and from that data, we were able to see which communities are most impacted. So that kind of started, that gave us a picture of what our buildings look like and how people live in these buildings and how certain environmental indicators impact certain communities based on geography. We then started working very closely with 2 CBOs in San Jose, ICANN and Vegelution. These are CBOs that work with the Spanish-speaking and Latino population in San Jose and the Vietnamese-speaking and Vietnamese population in San Jose. Those are the 2 largest minority populations in San Jose. And so we embarked on this journey with the CBOs to really understand the community's priorities from their experiences and perspective. And with these 2 CBOs, we were able to identify the community's priorities. And once we identified these priorities, we looked at how they overlap with building electrification. And the question was really, how can we use building electrification to advance the community's priorities? So we looked at 4 different priorities, and we identified those as being health and air quality, reliable energy, workforce development and job opportunities around building electrification, and housing and energy costs. So that was the second step. The third step, which is the one where we're at right now, is really trying to understand the key issues and the barriers to electrification. So we're meeting with stakeholders, especially stakeholders that work with labor. We're meeting with labor organizations, affordable housing groups, and historically marginalized populations, CBOs that work with historically marginalized populations, to really try to understand some of the issues and how they relate to these 4 priorities. And also to just understand what are the barriers and the challenges to building electrification. And then, so coming up for us, our next steps will be to do broader stakeholder engagement. We'll be doing broader stakeholder engagement in the fall, and then working really closely with CBOs to continue to develop the draft of the plan.
Yeah, can I dive in a little deeper? The Building Electrification Institute, and I think they supported the city of Berkeley as well, and probably others. Can you let local governments know how you made that connection and what is the arrangement?
Sure. So they are funded through the American Cities Climate Challenge. The American Cities Climate Challenge brought on a group of technical stakeholders, including the Building Electrification Institute, BEI for short, to support cities in their building electrification efforts. And BEI, they work with a number of different cities as well, and we've been working with them since 2019.
So local governments across California could reach out and get some technical assistance to support an analysis of their building stock. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, and then I'm so glad you're talking about all of these partners, the CBOs, and I'm sort of curious too. There's so much data to be overlaid, and it all can be done visually in these really compelling ways. So I'm imagining you guys are coming up with some pretty amazing maps, which I'm wondering if you do have anything to share, we can always attach that to this recording, because I'm finding these really compelling, and I'm wondering how you'll use maps in terms of the implementation of this plan.
Well, I think we've used the maps so far to engage stakeholders, and the maps that they've created some great graphics that really tell the story, help us to tell the story. And so we've used those maps for stakeholder engagement and to help convey the information to community members. We have also used those maps to help develop our policies and programs. That is an iterative list, but we have been able to get some takeaways from those maps and be able to target specific communities who are more likely to be impacted by future climate change events. Right.
So you could potentially in the future target more programming, more investment in certain areas, and kind of have like a phased approach.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. I wonder if other folks like you, that are listeners that are working on this stuff, they always appreciate knowing a little bit more about the real world insights, like the nuts and bolts of doing this kind of work. So I'm going to get very logistic for a second. I want to talk about how the work is funded. It sounds like you were really able to bring on some external capacity. Even it sounds like maybe even your position being somehow otherwise funded, not out of the general fund of the city of San Jose. Amazing. So what other ways has this work been funded?
So the American Cities Climate Challenge funds my position as well as the technical partner. They also bring expertise from NRDC and from delivery associates who help with coaching and guidance and policy development. And they have also connected us with organizations that help to support community engagement efforts as well. So that's been super helpful for San Jose. That's helped our capacity to engage additional CBOs in this work. And then also being able to connect us with other cities that are doing similar work and that are advancing policies.
Have you run into any issues, that there had to be some resources shared with CBOs to do this work, or some level of compensation for engagement? Have you guys kind of touched on that?
Yeah, so we did compensate the CBOs for this work. Some of that was funded through the American Cities Climate Challenge. And then we also won a small grant from USDN to be able to engage the CBOs through the co-creation process.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. And we're sort of on the topic of capacity. I'm wondering if you guys ran into capacity issues. Where are some of the challenges here in getting this work done?
Yeah, we definitely ran into capacity issues with, especially during COVID. I mean, it's definitely not an easy thing, and to be able to engage CBO groups over a long period of time when there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of other priorities, competing priorities for their communities, that's definitely a challenge. So. And then we also had to work on Zoom too, because no in-person events, which was also a barrier. Some things that we learned, I think, were just getting to know these CBOs and taking the time to build the relationship, trying to focus not specifically only on building electrification, but just really getting, taking time to get to know these CBOs, I think was really critical, because we're just in this weird operating state where people are stressed and there's reduced capacity. So trying to foster this welcoming and collegial environment was really important for our group.
Were there any particularly surprising potholes you stepped in terms of like time sucks or things that were harder than you thought they'd be, or they're taking longer?
I think just, yeah, I mean, I think that we had to be kind of flexible, and there was things that just came up that we were not prepared for. And that we just had to kind of pivot to adapt. And I think that was one of our strengths, was that, things just came up and we needed more of a translation budget and that was kind of unexpected. But we were able to pivot and be able to cater to our CBO's needs.
Okay. So you found yourself doing meetings and then you didn't have enough translation support and needed to put more investment into that. Yeah. Those are the little things I actually think that local governments will find really relatable and interesting. Like, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah. And also just, having a Spanish speaker and somebody who speaks Vietnamese on the calls, I think is really, really helpful. And that wasn't something that we knew that wasn't something that we knew from the beginning, but having that be part of our team was super, super helpful and helped, I think, build trust and build the relationships with our groups.
Yeah. Yes. I want to talk about you personally in doing this work, and you've probably been doing it for a long time. But have you had, in doing this particular plan, have you had to learn any new language or skills to do the work well?
Yeah, I think my Spanish skills have definitely improved being on our team and working with our Spanish speaking community members, and that's been very pleasant. I've also had to just be very flexible and adaptable to the group's needs. And I think also just having facilitation skills is really helpful, and trying to foster an environment that's convenient and flexible for a diverse group of people.
When we talk to local governments about this, the concept of trust comes up a lot, and sometimes local governments need to build or rebuild trust, and these, trying to find ways to have more productive collaborations with environmental justice communities in particular. I just wondered have you come across that, or do you have any lessons learned or tips for how to build that kind of trust where you're really having meaningful engagement?
Yeah, I think one tip is just being present each time that you're engaging these communities. I think that certain things and practices might come off as culturally acceptable or not acceptable in some cultures and not in others. And so it's really important for local governments to be present and to show up for these communities in a way that's culturally acceptable for them.
Do you have any particular examples about, a meeting that could have gone better or something like that?
I think that some of our takeaways were, I think it's really important for city staff to always have your camera on when you're talking with communities. Like that might, if you're just in the city staff meeting, then, maybe folks like are used to having cameras off because we're in meetings like all the time. We have, sometimes we have 8 meetings a day. Other people have probably a lot more, but when you're talking to these communities, I think that, it's our one-on-one interaction. It's really important to be fully present, to have your camera on, to have all of your attention be there for these communities.
Yeah, it's so interesting because that's a very 2021 concept where, you think engagement, you usually think in person kind of stuff. I'm just wondering what's the impact of being limited to online, or maybe there's pluses.
Well, I think that there's a lot that we probably miss being online. I mean, you think about in-person engagement, and there's so many interactions that benefit from being in person, and where you're able to build trust so much more easily because you might be able to have these side conversations that are, that you can't have when you're with 20 other people on a call. And you're able to, just spend a little bit more time with individuals when you're in person. So I think that there are some pluses, like the flexibility of being online and people could all be remote, but there is things that we certainly miss out on by not being able to be in person. And I think being in person is really a place where a lot of these communities thrive. So it's really important for them. This is how they've practiced in the past. So yeah, COVID has hindered that.
But I'm sure you can see the benefits of your work and, closer relationships forming and hopefully longer lasting collaborations with these organizations. And I just kind of want to move in that direction, just talking about how the engagement efforts you think are tangibly changing the trajectory of your electrification efforts. So it sounds to me like you've done a really good job. You're doing a good job targeting your efforts and learning more about your community, bringing on the right partners. And then you've also come up with these 4 priority areas, which maybe wouldn't have existed, right? You wouldn't have known what the priorities were if you didn't ask. But what else is tangibly going to change in your electrification? How are you going to do electrification differently because you've done this engagement?
It's completely different. I would say one is the biggest success that we've had has been the relationships that we've developed with our 2 CBO partners, because we've been able to engage them over a period of 6 months. And that takes extra resources to do, but we've been able to develop those relationships. We've been able to get to know them outside of just building electrification. In regards to how our building electrification plan is changing, as a result of our efforts, I would say that we've really shifted the focus from paying attention to best practices and just bringing in best practices to inform our building electrification strategies to focusing on what the community's priorities are and building the policies and programs around those 4 focus areas that I mentioned, and building outcomes and our goals around those 4 focus areas, which are the community's priorities, and building off of that. Those are our foundation. And we are also prioritizing historically marginalized communities and low-income communities as part of the main voices in our plan. We really want to reach out to these communities. We want their voices to be represented and reflected in our plan. So in our community engagement efforts, we're really prioritizing meeting those groups first.
I feel like I'm constantly in conversations with smart folks who are really struggling with this dichotomy between the urgency of the need, the urgency of emission reductions and climate change. But so this where do we need to speed up versus this total reckoning around we need to slow down and listen. And just, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually was reading the equity and buildings framework that was developed by USDN and Upright Consulting on how to do equity in buildings, in building policy. And one of the principles is that engaging these communities, engaging historically marginalized communities, I wish I had the principle in front of me because I'd do a better job of explaining it. But I think the point is that engaging these communities does not slow us down. It actually helps us, because these are the communities that we need to get to. These are the communities that will be most impacted by climate change. And I think we've had a real challenge in trying to engage these communities in the past, in trying to get them to do climate action, maybe in our way. But by focusing on the community's priorities, I think that we're able to engage them on a larger scale, and they will be part of the climate change movement if we do that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that sometimes that conversation gets held up as two separate, mutually exclusive things, when maybe it's more like you guys have done some really awesome things that have probably sped up your process, like looking and targeting your building stock. So there's ways that you use data that can target your efforts and help you move faster, and then at the same time, not shortcutting the really big need to do meaningful engagement that pays off dividends in the long run. So yeah, I think you guys are a really good example of that. And I'm wondering if, do you have any tips for local governments on just how to identify the right CBOs to work with?
I would say look at who are the trusted CBO groups that are doing a lot of work, that are working with a lot of these populations in the community. What kind of work are they doing? For us, it was really important that we worked with communities or CBOs that have experience with health and air quality and with community issues. So we looked at that. I would say the second thing is also looking at capacity. And that's a hard one because most CBOs have very limited capacity, especially during COVID times. But what is the CBO's capacity to be able to meaningfully engage in this type of work? And we were fortunate to have two CBOs that were really able to help us shape our plan because they had the capacity to support.
Yes. I'm wondering now to kind of move into, I know your plan is still in the works, and I'm wondering if you've already given some thought to how you will measure the success, especially since one of your main goals is to benefit impacted communities. So like, how will you measure whether or not you've achieved the vision?
Yeah, I think the different measures, the measures will depend on the policy or program that we're talking about, but we do have those 4 focus areas. And so we'll create some measures of success for each of those. And we do have outcomes that we want to see for each of the 4 focus areas. One of the indicators that continues to come up is energy burden, which is essentially how much somebody pays for their energy or their utility bill as a proportion of their income. And we want to try to reduce energy burden so that people are not as burdened by how much they pay for their energy over time. So that one comes up a lot. I would say the other one is workforce development and the number of jobs created through building electrification. I think that since we're engaging historically marginalized communities and low income groups, participation in the workforce and transition to electrification jobs, it will be important to track those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like there's an evolution happening right now where we're so used to, a lot of folks in this industry are so used to really measuring our success by kilowatts and emission reductions. It's very quantifiable things, and now having to look broader about how we're going to measure our success and making sure that we're tapping into who's benefiting. So you guys have a really good thoughts around this. I'm sure others will benefit from hearing it. And I'm wondering if there's anything else now that you've got some experience behind you. Is there anything else you want to share with other local governments? Tips, best practices, lessons learned, anything we didn't cover yet?
I think I'll share a couple that I have. One is, I think the biggest takeaway for me has been not to plan the plan prescriptively and not to come in with a plan. I think that's, kind of something that you hear, but city and local governments still do this a lot where, you bring a plan to the community, or at least that has been a criticism. You bring a plan into a community and you say, what do you think about this plan? And so I think that it's really, really important, and in our experience, to not have anything really in mind, not having those best practices in mind when you're coming to the community, just asking what are your community priorities and trying to understand those community priorities, and then arriving at what the recommendation should be. And then I think another nugget of wisdom from my experience has been looking at these communities holistically, looking at their neighborhoods holistically, because it's really hard to talk about building electrification and convince somebody of the benefits of building electrification if their house is on fire, or if they feel really unsafe walking around in their neighborhoods. And so I think that if you can look at these communities holistically, then you can see that other basic needs and things like safety are really, really critical. Those are the priorities, right? And so how can we marry building electrification with safety? How can we bring policies that improve both of those things, that enhance both of those things? I think that's when you're going to have a lot of buy-in.
Thank you so much for all these thoughts. And my last sort of question is just sort of an acknowledgement that existing buildings are trickier. They're trickier. And I'm wondering what are you facing what kind of resistance are you facing in doing this work that just other local governments would probably resonate with?
I think, just trying to understand what the cost of building electrification will be. And we've spent a lot of time trying to understand the cost with our technical partner, but just looking at all of the factors that can influence that cost question is really important. There's a lot of other factors that play into the ROI of building electrification, and it's not a one size fits all because of all of these other factors that can influence the cost, right? Like your building efficiency, your utility rate, your climate zone, the efficiency of your new appliance compared to your old appliance. But really honing in on that cost question and being able to evaluate that so that people could make the best decisions for themselves and based on informed constituents.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly be staying tuned. We're looking forward to seeing the final plan be released, and you guys are sure to come up with some good ideas around how you're going to help property owners help you meet these goals and get there with their existing buildings. And so I just want to say thank you so much for spending the time with us, sharing your insights, your work and your advice. And thank you to our listeners. We hope that this conversation has provided some inspiration as you consider ways to ensure that your electrification efforts are not only effective, but benefiting your impacted communities. So to access other capacity and knowledge building resources or make a technical assistance request, please visit the SEEK program at eecoordinator.info. And until next time, please stay well.